Hello, everyone. Welcome back into Bolt Breakdowns here on the Guilty as Charged podcast, talking about an insane Chargers game where they end up beating Minnesota 28-24. A whole lot of things to talk about in this one, from coaching to the players to everything that we'll get to, some of the performances of the year for some players, and also some disaster class performances. But overall, the Chargers needed to win this game. This was a must-win game for them. So credit to, the coaching staff for getting this done and coming out with the win. In some aspects, we'll talk about some of the negative things that they did too. And credit to Justin Herbert. Credit to Keenan Allen. Credit to Tuli Pelotu, Kenneth Murray with a huge game-winning run stop and then a huge game-winning interception. So he played some ball today, some rough run moments from him, but overall a second good week from him in terms of doing the green dot roll. A lot of things to talk about. Let's just get right into it. I want to start with the offense first, and then I'll branch out to some things about the offense and some particular moments in this game that I'm sure people will want to talk about. But first thing we got to talk about is Justin Herbert. 400-yard game. First 400-yard game of his career, which is kind of hard to believe because I think he had the Dolphins game, he had the Browns game, which I think was actually his previous career high. But now he puts up 405 yards, 3 touchdowns. Let me see exactly how many of those yards were to Keenan Allen, who breaks his single game career receiving record of 183 yards and smashes it for 215, the first 200-yard game of Keenan Allen's career in year essentially 11, which is absolutely insane for him. He was cooking Byron Murphy and everybody all day, giving the Vikings tons of problems. Overall, Mike Williams with 121 yards. We'll also get to Mike Williams and some of the things we need to talk about there. Palmer with the ultimate tip drill touchdown of all time, making up for his fumble. So that was cool to see. We'll talk about the offense as a whole. But I want to get to Justin Herbert first because, a 400-yard game does not just happen every week. And I know the state of the Vikings secondary is a little shaky, right? You're throwing against Byron Murphy and a lot of guys who the Vikings are rebuilding their secondary. They're rebuilding, I think, their defensive approach on the whole. Good defensive line, but the back half, the second and third levels of that defense are not set yet. And Brian Flores is trying to kind of figure out things he can do. But that said, I just thought the decision making from Justin Herbert in this game was so on point. And it's not that he was bad the first 2 weeks, because Justin Herbert was good. But I think he kind of lacked that, decisiveness in the pocket that we've seen from Justin Herbert so many times in the past in those first 2 games. And I think that it just showed today, right? He was quick to respond to kind of what the defense was throwing at him. I really liked that final drive before halftime where he got the touchdown to Donald Parham to make it 14-10. That was a really impressive drive because every time that there was a blitz or a simulated pressure from Flores, Herbert kind of knew it and, was able to react appropriately, getting the ball out of the line on time, having the right play call, the right adjustment for what was about to happen, right? So I think that was a really impressive drive from him. Early on in that game, you had Justin Herbert almost kind of get sacked, but then evade and pick up 13 yards with his legs for a first down, which we really hadn't seen kind of that, pocket collapsing and then Herbert, making a play with his legs in that way in a while. I know he picked up one in the Miami game, but in that kind of a moment, when the pocket flushes out, I honestly, based on Herbert's last couple games, expected them to stand in the pocket, take that sack a little bit. And I think we saw him be aggressive, be decisive on that play and many others when the pressure was in his face. And Justin Herbert is always kind of money under pressure in a lot of ways, but I thought that this game might have been the best of his career. I think you can point to the Miami game, you can point to a bunch of others, but I think Justin Herbert deserves a ton of credit for how he played today, and it was not a perfect game. There were mistakes. There was the the Josh Palmer touchdown that probably should have been an interception. There was the Mike Williams misread where, if he looks at the other side of the field, he has a touchdown. So there are things you can poke holes in. But ultimately, when I was watching that game and the moments that Justin Herbert had to have it, had to be money. He was the best maybe I've ever seen in his career. And some of that is the Vikings defense, but I think we have to give credit to Justin Herbert for, kind of really improving on everything he did in the first 2 weeks of the season. Again, not that those games were bad, but just being a tad more decisive, a tad more of a finisher in some of those key moments when he had to have it on drives. The defense is coming at him, blitzing him, pressuring him, throwing the kitchen sink at him, and I just think he had the answer almost every time. 85 to 90% of the time, and so for Herbert to look that on the money, that comfortable, in that pressure cooker of a game where the Chargers are 0-3 and we might be talking about jobs and all of these things. I thought that was a masterclass from him. First 400-yard game of his career, navigated the circumstances super well, and that's why he's a franchise quarterback. I don't know if we totally gave Justin Herbert his due the first 2 weeks of the season because of how the outcomes went, but I wanted to start the show by talking about him because he was awesome today. Someone else who was awesome was Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen turns back the clock, 11 years. He has his first 200-yard game of his career. His previous was 183 against the Texans in 2019. And unlike that game, he makes some big plays in the final moments here for the Chargers to come out on top, pick up a couple, huge, first down conversions, give the defense hell the whole day. Poor Byron Murphy, man. I don't know what that man's PFF sheet is going to look like tomorrow, but Keenan Allen and Mike Williams certainly did a number on him today. But I was one of those people before the season that was not clamoring for cutting Mike Williams after the season or cutting Keenan Allen after the season or anything like that. But I did think last year, because of the hamstring injury and because of other things, because of age, I thought he had lost a step. But now we're talking about Keenan Allen, who in 4 of his final 6 games last year had 80-plus yards and is just continuing to be a supernova this year. He had 187 yards coming into this game. He has 400 yards on the season coming out of this game. Like, absolutely insane stuff from Keenan Allen. The Julian Edelman-like Patriots play where he threw the ball to Mike Williams. Just awesome stuff from Slayer. And it was nice to see him kind of turn the clock back and have that sort of a game because the Chargers needed it today. Obviously, we'll talk about Mike's injury and what that means for the team going forward, but it didn't really feel like the Chargers had easy offense outside of Keenan, Mike, and then, some of the plays that they dialed up in the red zone that I think made life easier on offense. But the running game wasn't doing anything today. Keenan Allen and Mike and those guys had to be the engines that Justin Herbert could rely on. And so for Keenan Allen to have this kind of a game, it might be the best game of his career. There's a couple I think you could point to with him where he may not have had the yardage totals, but still balled out. There's a couple moments in the Pittsburgh game. There's a lot of Keenan Allen games that can come off the top of anyone's head. But yeah, for him to have this kind of a freak performance, I certainly didn't see it coming. If you told me Keenan Allen got 100 yards, I wouldn't have been surprised. But for him to have a 200-yard day and set his own personal career record, insane stuff from Keenan Allen in year 11, like I said. Let's talk about Mike Williams, and unfortunately, let's talk about injuries and things we need to talk about Mike Williams. His performance on the day, he ends up having 100. Mike Williams ends up having 121 yards on the day. Comes up with some big catches, where they were all the way backed up. I want to say it was second and like 12, almost in Vikings. You're deep in Chargers territory. Vikings have them backed up. And Herbert hits a frozen rope to Mike Williams, which just, he goes down, dives, gets that ball. One of the most crazy Mike Williams catches I've ever seen, and probably one of the most crazy Herbert to Mike Williams sequences that probably won't be talked about that way because it wasn't a scoring play. It wasn't this huge play like downfield for a touchdown or something. But I thought that the level of difficulty for both of those guys on that was insane. And of course, despite the 121-yard day, despite the touchdown that he had with Keenan Allen, the storyline that's going to be coming out of this game is, of course, that he could not put pressure on his leg and did grab for his knee. And what was an unfortunate, looks like a non-contact injury. We will figure this out over the next coming days, next coming hours, I would imagine. Adam Schefter of ESPN did report that he essentially was being examined for a potential knee injury. He did get carted off the field after he was helped to the sideline. So I just want to say personally, from the bottom of my heart, Mike Williams is one of the most my most favorite Chargers that I've watched on a consistent week-to-week basis for a number of years now. I as a fan, and I've wrote about Mike Williams since his rookie year, since my first year of like covering the Chargers in this kind of capacity back in 2017, the first year in LA. And he is just, such a fun player to watch. It's unfortunate he's been, injury kind of riddled, if you want to say, throughout his career, and has had unfortunate games that he's missed, because when he is on the field, he is so fun to watch. We saw that today. We saw that in so many of these big Mike Williams games, the game against Cleveland from a couple years ago, the game that, honestly kind of started the love affair with Mike Williams to some extent, the 2-point conversion in Kansas City, to beat the Chiefs after years of, struggling, at Arrowhead and then struggling after that, and then not winning at Arrowhead for, 3 years after that play almost. Mike Williams is special. And I think that it really sucks if it is a torn ACL, like a lot of people expect. I expect that to probably be the diagnosis, if he was not able to put pressure on that leg, or at least a knee injury that's going to keep him out for probably a while. I hope that that's not the case. I pray that that's not the case. But whatever it is, all love to Mike Williams, and unfortunate way potentially for this game to end for him after all he did. So hope for the best for him. Other injury news: Sebastian Joseph Day left the game with a neck injury, but then came back. And then Derwin James is the guy we're going to have to talk about on defense, because he had a hamstring injury, was questionable to return, and didn't return. So yeah, unfortunate stuff from the Chargers from an injury department. But best of my love, and best of, I think, I speak for all Chargers fans when I say most love to Big Mike. Individual performances on offense. We could talk about the Josh Palmer game where he had the fumble and then recovers his legacy on the tip drill where Herbert threw a ball that should have been picked to Bynum. He's right there for the tip drill touchdown, which was awesome. I want to talk about the Donald Parham thing really quickly. And people who are viewers of this show, listeners of this podcast, if you listen during the 2022 season, the thing that I said after every game almost that the Chargers lost was, please put up a red zone package where you put up all the tall guys, all the tight ends, everybody in the red zone, and just get all of their big asses down there and score a touchdown. Because it's just such an advantage to have Donald Parham, Big Gerald Everett, all of these guys, Stone Smart, who is athletic, and Kellen Moore on the touchdown before the end of the half. But it takes 4 of them and puts them on that tight end formation. And I think we're sitting at a point where Donald Parham obviously has 3 touchdowns on the season. He has another defensive pass interference penalty that he drew in week 1 against Miami. It's such a leverage mismatch for defenses to have to worry about Keenan Allen and worry about Mike Williams and worry about all these guys. And meanwhile, here's 6'8" Donald Parham, walking onto the field. That's like, oh, we have to cover that guy, right? It was just something I screamed about Joe Lombardi like all year, not doing it. He did it once briefly in the Rams game where he had Gerald Everett and Donald Parham and I think Mike Williams on the field at the same time. But overall it wasn't as consistent in its usage as it should have been. But I just think that that's, the way that Kellen Moore has implemented that has been awesome to see. And I think overall, we're going to get to the big no-no in a second and talk about everything that happened in that sequence that everybody knows. But overall, I thought that this was a good Kellen Moore game. You put up 28 points. Justin Herbert puts up 400 yards. I can't complain about a whole lot, except 4th and 1. The Chargers are on their own 24. there's going to be a portion of the fan base that is yelling at Brandon Staley for going for it, and I'm going to be flat out with you. I 1000% endorse the decision to go for it. The analytical model said to go for it. Ben Baldwin and all of his materials that he uses online, a lot of the models said it was an easy go for it situation. 4th and 1, right? You get this, you close out the game. And I know there's going to be people who advocate for punting, and J.K. Scott's been a good punter. You play field position and move on. How many times have we seen that backfire for the Chargers, right? How many times have we begged Justin Herbert to finish the game in his own hands, right? How many times have we begged for it? So that is why, for me, I can't crap on the Staley decision. And I firmly agree with it. And I know there's going to be people in the comments who yell at me for agreeing with it. There's going to be people who love it. There's going to be people who hate it. I already saw Jimmy Johnson talking about it on TV, and he hated the decision. But I'm going to level with you. I love the decision to go for it. What I didn't love was the play call. 4th and 1. You cannot fullback dive with a Joshua Kelly who was averaging, for this game, 11 carries for 12 yards. He's barely averaging a yard per carry, or I guess before this run, he was averaging 10 for 11. He was running 10 carries for 11 yards. You cannot give it to Joshua Kelly in that situation. And what I just said about taking the ball out of Herbert's hands and, relying on the defense, Kellen Moore ends up kind of screwing that over because he takes the ball out of Herbert's hands after he's been baptizing the Vikings defense all day and Keenan Allen's been dominant. Hell, you can try the Philadelphia Eagles tush push. It works, for them. I know obviously there's been other teams who have gone for it and haven't done it, but there were so many other plays to go for in that situation than a Joshua Kelly fullback dive. It's like, what are we doing? Especially when the run defense has the run offense has been having the day it's been having. And the run blocking, from the offensive line was not as good as it was in the first 2 games. So to call a Joshua Kelly run in that circumstance, I just, to me, that is where I fall in it. Great call to go for it for Brandon Staley. Horrendous play call by Kellen Moore. And there's going to be people who blame Staley more. There's going to be people who blame Moore more. And people will fall on any, degree of a spectrum for how they view that moment. But that's what I thought about the call to go for it on 4th and 2. We cannot sit here every week and be like, take the ball out of Justin Herbert's hands and rely on your defense, and then be like, oh, well, then don't go for that on 4th down and rely on your defense, right? The problem was they gave the ball to Joshua Kelly and took it out of Justin Herbert's hands, which was a Kellen Moore decision. So that's ultimately where I fall on the 4th down Staley gate, Moore gate controversy. I cannot consistently say, and I've said this on this channel many times, that I love 2021 Brandon Staley and everything he did by giving the Chargers an edge on 4th down. And I think he took away an edge from the Chargers by not going for it on 4th down consistently as much in 2022. And the analytics bear that out as well. And I can't also just say crush him for going for it when I crushed him for not going for it last year. Right. Enough. So to me, the play call was wrong. The play call, there were about a million other play calls that would have worked better, and that's on Kellen Moore. But the decision to go for Brandon Staley, this is going to piss people off. I love doing that, I guess. I agree with it. That's about it on offense. I don't know if there's like a big storyline that I want to talk about. I think one thing is, like I said, in the run game, they missed Eckler today. I think Eckler would have been absolutely lethal against this Vikings, defense. Not really for what he can do in the run game, because the run blocking, like I said, was struggling, but he would have been just probably a less Keenan Allen yards, and it would have just been a 100-yard after the catch Austin Eckler type of day. I wouldn't have been surprised if that happened. Maybe that would have affected Justin Herbert's ADOT and all these other things, but I do think they missed Austin Eckler out there, and that's part of the problem with why they weren't able to run the ball, but more so their spacing on offense. That was kind of one of my notes when it came to this game. I want to talk about Quentin Johnston. I do think he should have played more in this game. I would imagine he didn't get that many snaps until after Mike Williams got, injured. They did a couple things where they tried to use him in like some scenarios where they had him in motion. Um, Justin Herbert threw the ball to him on third down when he was like double covered. I didn't think that was the greatest decision from Herbert. So they like tried to get him a little bit more into the game, but it just again didn't feel like it was as consistent. Really until Mike Williams left the game, that Quentin Johnston then of course had to play. But yeah, I would have liked to seen a little bit more again interesting ways of using him, especially when you're doing a lot of these like trick plays and stuff with other players, right? It doesn't make sense to me to not continue to do it and continue to throw a screen practically to everyone but QJ, except for essentially one or two times in this game. That part of the Quentin Johnston usage I still don't get. All right, that's enough offensive talk. Let's talk defense. Let's talk defense. Um, First off the bat, positive things. Tuli below 2, man. Have yourself a game, because wow. I'm reading the ESPN numbers right now, and I don't think when we're talking about defensive play that those numbers are as good about evaluating defensive performance for the day. Officially, to have 4 total uh, 4 total pressures, or essentially what was counted as like 2 half sacks for Tuli in this game. And then I think he had, if I'm seeing it, yeah, he essentially had 1 half sack and also a run stop that was a tackle for loss type situation. But I don't know what the PFF numbers are going to be tomorrow, and Arjun, as I'm recording this episode, has probably sent the PFF numbers to the chat or whatever. But overall, this was a great day for Tuli and everything he did. I would imagine he ends up with like 14 pressures from this game, because that's what it felt like. It just felt like Tuli was this ever-present player consistently all the time. He was just there. And he teamed up with Bosa. They had him, essentially, moving all over the line. And it didn't matter where he was, because he was, just getting so much speed, so much power on his rushes. There was a drive where I think maybe it was the Morgan Fox sack, or maybe I'm just thinking about a pressure on Kirk Cousins. I honestly don't know. Where O'Neal on the Vikings, he just from the beginning of the play, like drives him 5 yards back off of his spot, which is just an absolutely insane effort and something that I did not expect. As good as Tuli was last week and everything he showed, I did not expect him to show that kind of like speed to power type stuff yet. So awesome game from Tuli below 2. You have to consider increasing his snaps every game, because if you're getting that kind of pass rush production, which I don't think he's going to get that type of pass rush production every single game, but he showed today that he's got that dog in him. He has the ability again to, push offensive linemen back with ease. Again, not every offensive line you play is going to be as, injury riddled as the Vikings was, and they have a lot of problems that they're dealing with over there. But for him to have the game he had today in a rookie performance in your 3rd game, there's so few defensive or offensive Chargers that I can think in the last like 10 years who have just burst onto the scene and have had these kind of performances consistently, outside of Herbert and a couple other rookie players that we can think of that balled out. Derwin, obviously his first year, but for Tuli to have the impact he's having, it's something that I didn't see coming. I thought he would have a good year. I didn't think it was going to be this good. This stuff that he's doing right now is absolutely insane these last 2 weeks, and I'll be curious to see what the numbers were in terms of pressures and his overall impact as a pass rusher. And even as a run defender, he did good in that aspect today too, which that was one of the questions coming on him out of college and becoming like a pure edge player. He did have like a 30% missed tackle rate in college. That was one of the, kind of his weaknesses, but he has since, I think become a much more efficient player. It's not always going to look this good for Tuli, but for it to look as good as it does early, I think that that's a huge credit to Tuli Tuipulotu. So He's the defensive player of the game, the year, the moment. We do have to talk about the Tuli breakout game. And I'll say for going over more positive defensive performers, Sebastian Joseph Day probably had his best game of the year today. Rutgers Sebastian Joseph Day, as was mentioned on the broadcast. I think that he has the injury, comes back out. He ends up having 2 big run stops, has a sack. I would imagine he got quite a decent amount of pressures too. So good day for him. I'm just kind of going through the box score and trying to see what I remember. Joey Bosa, not the biggest like pass rush day from him, but again, he was kind of limited on off. Did have the sack where he kind of combined with Tuli on that play. Khalil Mack, not a great day as a pass rusher, but I would imagine probably an okay day as a run defender, although there were some times where it did feel like the Chargers run defense was less efficient when Madison was attacking those edges, but he didn't really go like off in this game, but was picking up some chunk plays. So I don't know necessarily what to say about Khalil Mack yet, in terms of like having a take on his game. Probably was an alright one. Morgan Fox got a sack. Morgan Fox got the sack where he kind of combined with Tuli. Bosa got a sack. Sebastian Joseph Day, Tuli, obviously. So overall, that defensive line feasted today. The run defense left a little bit to be desired, but overall, insane game from those guys. So that is the positive. I think Kenneth Murray overall, considering how critical he was down the stretch, he had some moments in the run game that weren't perfect, but overall, considering what our expectations were when he was named green dot linebacker, he has since exceeded those expectations in a big way. The secondary. I don't know what the final PFF numbers are going to be in terms of, what this performance was. But overall, Justin Jefferson exploded. Probably, again, not as bad maybe as we were thinking it was going to be heading into this game. But the Chargers just consistently did dumb stuff in the secondary. Justin Jefferson touchdown that he had, in the game to give Minnesota the lead at one point when it was 24-21. That was because Ja Taylor was starting to cut inside and then cut back outside because he thought somebody was taking care of Justin Jefferson, and nobody was taking care of Justin Jefferson until it was way too late, and he was already off to the end zone essentially for what was for a free charity touchdown that the Chargers gave him. Just frustrating, dumb stuff to watch. This goes for the secondary, but as the team as a whole. But man, how are the Chargers still committing this many penalties on critical third downs? I don't have the situational stats and exactly what it ended up being the proportion that's on third down versus the other downs, but there's so many drives where they don't get off the field because of a Derwin penalty, a Michael Davis penalty. I'm trying to remember some off the top of my head. I want to say Asante or Ja had one as well. Just some really dumb stuff. You cannot consistently keep giving a team like the Vikings, who has Justin Jefferson, opportunities to remain on the field. Man, it's kind of amazing when you think about it that the Vikings were 4 for 14 on third down, despite I actually don't know how the conversion numbers work in terms of do the penalties get added on as they don't get added on as a successful third down conversion, and the Vikings did get a couple big penalties from that. So in reality, the Vikings are probably better than 4 for 14 on third down, when you can factor in the Chargers penalties. But man, it's just so drive crushing, drive deflating, puts more pressure on the defensive line to overperform like it did today. And it's a lack of discipline. It's a lack of discipline from Staley that this secondary is still struggling as much as it is. And, I'm going to get to the elephant in the room in a second. I can't believe it's 30 minutes and we haven't gotten to that topic. But Michael Davis was bad today. Asante was bad today. Ja, at moments, I think, made some good plays. But again, it's the lack of communication. And Justin Jefferson, when he is able to just take a seam and then, take a crosser, like he did in that, one of his first drive where he had 3 catches for 80 yards or something like that. It's going to kill you, because then it's just Justin Jefferson is going to beat you in a million different ways. but the dumb like miscommunication penalty stuff, like that cannot happen. You have zero margin for error when you are playing Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and all of these guys, right? So on the day, I'll read the box score for the secondary, I guess, and what the game ended up being. Justin Jefferson, 7 receptions for 149 yards. TJ Hawkinson, 8 receptions for 78. Jordan Addison, 6 for 52. It just can't be allowed to happen. And again, it's the way the Chargers are getting beat too. Because if you just said 7, whatever, Justin Jefferson had 150 yards. He came up 1 short of that today. But it would be like, all right, Justin Jefferson's going to do that to any defense. But it's about the fact that all of these plays for Jefferson and for other guys, they're all explosive plays. And again, we just talked about the penalties on 3rd down and how that's deflating, but it's even more deflating to have that kind of stuff happen consistently to your defense. And it makes it so difficult to play 3rd down because the Vikings are essentially going to it with full confidence. The Chargers were relatively successful in the non-penalty 3rd downs in this game. The Vikings go 4 for 14, but I don't know what to say anymore in terms of what this rotation is going to be going forward. Because, man, Michael Davis made mistakes, Asante made mistakes, Ja made mistakes, and none of them look good today. And yeah, some of that's Justin Jefferson, but it's also the fact that like nobody knows the leverages that they're supposed to play. Right, like I just said on the Ja touchdown that was allowed to Justin Jefferson. There's another one where Michael Davis gets a simple like stutter step, and then Asante like misses a tackle on, I believe, the KJ Osborne touchdown that happened in this game. So Davis just gets stutter step. Asante takes a bad angle on a tackle, and that's 7 for the Vikings. Those plays are just so deflating, and there's so many of them. We talk about the 3rd down penalties that the secondary commits. But man, like the communication's off again. And let's get to the elephant in the room now. JC Jackson, 5-year, $82.5 million deal, $40 million guaranteed, and he's benched. Healthy scratch. Not just benched in the way that he was in the Denver game, but them coming into this game with JC Jackson in street clothes. That is disgraceful for this team for Brandon Staley and Tom Telesco to make that move for this guy to be your CB1, and he is essentially like a non-factor anymore. That is an indictment on both of them in making that move. And look, I'm not going to be disingenuous. We all liked that move at the time, but also I'm not the guy who gives out 5-year, $82.5 million contracts. And it's about the issues that JC has had in adjusting to the system. Yes, there have been injuries and again, things that have slowed him down in terms of adapting. The ankle injury last year, torn patella tendon, and then coming back this year has been a struggle too. But it's about the fact that, and again, this goes back to the coverage looking as bad as it does for the Chargers at times. JC's biggest strength in New England was that he was a man-to-man corner, right? And this defense that Staley has built does not allow guys to play man-to-man, right? Like primarily in 2021, 2022, and now, except really for the game against Miami, which turned into a mess. Staley, zone, too high man coverage. Like that is the bread and butter of his defense. And JC, the thing about him is that he's been bad these years and hasn't played well, but I could easily see him slipping back into New England if the Chargers were to cut him after this year and having a year where he goes off, because it's again about the leverages that he's playing, and for the Chargers to healthy scratch him in this game, who knows whether he's going to play next week. I don't know, because Michael Davis and Asante didn't play well, so maybe they bench somebody else next week and JC's back. Who knows? Maybe they just thought that this wouldn't be the game for JC because of the Justin Jefferson thing, but they play Devontae Adams next week, so that's not really a reason either. But this secondary, man, like makes me want to pull my hair out. And again, it's all self-inflicted wounds, right? From the top on down. Clearly how Staley's communicating these leverages and communications isn't working. The players aren't executing, from Asante to Ja to Michael Davis in this game. All bad. Even Derwin, like to me, has not looked like Derwin through these 3 weeks. right? There's plays where, he's getting picked apart in coverage, not so much in this game, although he did have the third down penalty stuff, which, is a whole other discussion that I don't even know if I'm going to get to today. But, the Chargers just have to be, they have to find something, because as great as the offense was today, and Herbert puts up 400 yards and Keenan puts up 200 yards, they're not going to do that every week. They are not going to continue to bail out this defense. And I know the defense got 2 stops at the end, but this back half of this defense is a dumpster fire. Like, it is a mess that I don't know if it can be fixed at this point. I don't know if there is fixing it until next year when you reset who the personnel are, or, if there's a new coach or a new GM or whatever it might be. Who knows what the situation is, if Staley and Telesco are here or they're not. This is again, this is why the Chargers are going to remain 32nd in DVOA for as long as they will this season, because until that secondary is fixed, other teams are going to trample all over it. And it could have been a lot worse today against the Vikings than it was if Tuli and the defensive line did not have the performance that it had. So I don't know. Like, I'm at a loss for the secondary in terms of what you do going forward. And man, the fourth down decision at the end of the game there is going to generate a lot of controversy. Like I said, I agree with Staley's call. Do not agree with Kellen Moore's play call, which I think was totally out of line. But yeah, overall the Chargers go back to 1-2. Kind of an exhausting game, as you can tell, maybe by the length of this episode. But it was nice to get back in the win column. A lot of things to talk about going forward, especially based on the results of injuries and how the week transpires going forward. But I hope that you guys all enjoyed this win. I hope that you guys all enjoyed this episode of Bolt Breakdowns, and I hope one day that the Chargers will play a normal football game. But that was not meant to happen today, and probably will not happen in my lifetime. So that'll do it for this episode. I'm exhausted. I'm sure you guys are all exhausted too. Bolt up.